Hello, Richard Treloar here, Anglican Bishop of Gippsland, in beautiful Mallacoota with the Reverend Jude Benton, priest in charge of the cooperating parish of Croajingolong. Thanks, Jude, for spending some time with us today and for your hospitality.
That's all right. Thank you for coming all the way to join us.
Tell us just a little bit about the hours leading up to the fire front and those first 24 hours.
So thankfully in Mallacoota we got about 36 hours notice that the fire was coming. So that gave us time as a community, as a church, to think, what are we going to do? We set up the church as an interim relief centre with food and activities and with movies that people could watch until the power went out, and just kept trying to keep people calm, trying to let people know that this was going to be a safe place for as long as it could be protected. At about 6 o'clock the evening before the fire, the first of the "this is getting serious" messages came through. At that point the roads were shut. We decided we would get on our little boat, we would take our cat, and so we then spent 36 hours out in the middle of a lake with about 35 other boats and probably a couple of hundred people spread amongst those boats, just waiting. And the sky went black and the sky went red and we had ash falling from the sky, but we certainly didn't see or experience the flames in the fire in the way that the people in town did.
They were on the foreshore, is that right?
They were on the foreshore, so they kept the foreshore area safe. They had people protecting that with big water. They made curtains of water. They had a hall that had about 900 people in it, and they kept that safe. A silence on all sirens, so they didn't use any sirens during this, and the whole thing was, as soon as the fire sirens went, people were to get into the water. That actually never happened. There was never a need for people to actually get into the water itself. We spent the time out on the boat not knowing what was happening, and I'll say to you all, if you're ever putting things on Facebook or on social media, make sure you know that it's true. Because a lot of people were putting things that they didn't know were true, they just thought were true, and that caused a lot of trauma to people, that they were told that their house had been burned or the school had been burned and all these things which turned out not to be true. We stayed out there, and when we came back our first call was actually to come to the church here and check, and yes, it was safe. At that stage we'd had about 50 people sleep in it the night before the fire until they were told to go to the foreshore. Then they'd come back after they'd slept in it the night after the fire, and some of them then stayed here for 3 or 4 days until they were evacuated by the Navy. So the church became home for a whole lot of people, sleeping on the floor, sleeping on the pews, just being here. There was no power, there were obviously no showers or anything like that, but it was a safe place for them to be.
Fantastic, kind of like base camp.
Yeah, like base camp.
And
like base camp.
how did you feel, and Andy, out on the water, watching the kind of the glow of the fires and the noise that I gather was associated with that, and hearing explosions of gas tanks and things, and knowing it was somewhere near your house but not knowing if your house was safe or not? It's
a very unusual experience, and one that's very hard to describe, because as I say, we were far enough out, we were 4 kilometres out, and so while the sky was incredibly dark at 9 o'clock in the morning, you couldn't see the end of the boat, and our boat's only 3 metres long, but you still couldn't see the end of it. You were using head torches and things at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was just completely black. We could hear the roar of the fire. It's like a freight train. We didn't hear the gas bottles from where we were. It was more this thing around social media and around the fear of what you're coming back to. There's been a psychologist in town doing several public talks, and his name's Rob Gordon, and he's an international specialist on this kind of traumatic event. And he says trauma is not what happens, it's what you think is going to happen. And so when you're focused on my worst case scenario is, then that's what causes the anxiety and the trauma. So we personally didn't expect to come back to a house. We had seen some stuff that people had put on Facebook of the fire coming through the street we live in, and certainly didn't expect to come back to a house. And then after we'd come to the church, we then went to the house, discovered the house was perfectly fine, but our garage and our fences and our backyard were destroyed. And that moment of realising we were one of the lucky ones in our street.
You mentioned Rob's ministry. What other supports have you had on the ground here as you've tried to lead your people through the weeks since the fire?
We've had heaps of support. So initially, when it first happened, Mallacoota was very full with tourists and holidaymakers, and that included a couple of beach mission teams. The teams themselves got evacuated out on the Navy ship, the first one that went, but some of the team parents are clergy as well, and so they stayed for another few days just to help me to do a bit of pastoral care, to be present in the caravan park, things like that, and to be a bit of a sounding board for where to from here. Bishop Richard flew in on a
Spartan,
on an army Spartan,
yeah.
which is like a Hercules that's been cut in half.
That's right.
So it was wonderful to see him. And the senior police chaplain, a guy called Treloar, has been fantastic, and he called in almost every day just to check on me, and sometimes that would involve me just crying down the phone and him listening. Sometimes it would involve me saying, Drew, I don't want to talk today, and hanging up on him, and then he'd still ring the next day. And he was...
And Jude, as I said, it was a pretty confronting drive out here, and just the incredible loss of habitat, the great expanse, the acreage of national park that's been destroyed. And as you start to process this event sort of 40 days on, what sorts of theological reflections are coming to you around that? How are you processing it spiritually in terms of your faith, and where is God meeting you in this experience?
I think it's that whole reminder that our Christian faith is built on death and on resurrection. And if we only focus on the death, we miss the resurrection. And if we want to leap too quickly to the resurrection, we miss the fact that there's this period in between where the disciples went, what on earth has just happened? And I think that's where we are as a community, and that's where we'll be. And the challenge is to help people keep moving to find resurrection. The Australian bush is remarkable, and it's starting to shoot. The darkest of the burnt trees have now got this green fuzzy halo all around them with new shoots. The little xanthria grass trees are now knee high, and they were just completely gone. I was watching out the church window here yesterday, sitting outside, and there's this little native bush mouse that's scurrying across the grass as there's little birds in the trees. So the Australian bush is remarkable at recovering, and I think our Christian faith can speak into that. The Psalms often start as a psalm of lament, and then they move through this period of, well, help me understand this, God, and then they finish with rejoicing. And we too often just take the last bit of those psalms, but this teaches us we have to take all of them.
Yeah. We've been really overwhelmed by the messages of support and encouragement, prayerful concern, generosity from within the diocese, beyond the diocese, right around the world, in fact. And there'll be quite a few people watching this at schools and in parishes and on the diocesan website, perhaps. I guess an opportunity to acknowledge that support, but also to say a little bit about what you need going forward.
So I want to say firstly a true and heartfelt thanks to those who have prayed for us, who have written letters or emails or sent messages of support. To those we've never responded to, just please understand that in amongst it all, there simply hasn't been the time or the energy to actually respond to every call, to every message, to every email. Many people have also given very generously financially, either to the parish or through the diocese website. And the fantastic thing with the diocese website is Mallacoota has had a lot of media attention because we're the tourist story, we're the interest story, and there's other places in the diocese who have been hit just as hard, if not harder, and haven't had that attention. So encouraging people to give through the diocese fund is actually enabling ministry to continue in these other places that haven't had quite the level of ADF support or media coverage. Huge thank you to those who have given faithfully. We've had wonderful little care parcels arrive from churches with just letters and cards and Prezi vouchers, the Visa card vouchers that we can give to people
very practical
who are in need, that can just go and use that on whatever it is that they need today.
But no more goods, right?
But please, there is this human nature thing that says when a tragedy happens, we should give stuff. please do not give stuff to any disaster.
We were just up in the op shop and it's literally overflowing.
It is literally overflowing.
Yeah.
What people need to understand is that the government already has a system in place to get what is actually required for life, so your food, your basic hygiene products, into these communities as quickly as possible, whether it's, in this case, it was through helicopters, other cases it's through roads. And so within 24 hours, we had 1,000 or more boxes of food arrive. So people then want to go and they give food. Well, that food just becomes wastage. It becomes another disaster to actually sort through. The same with secondhand clothes. If you're going to give money, or find an organisation and check, this is what I could give, is it all be distributed?
And hopefully that's something we can help with through the diocese, and you know, to coordinate with the parishes on the ground as to what the needs are and help, you know, direct those energies in the most useful way. So,
yes. But also I'd say to people, trust the priest, trust the diocese, trust whatever you want to give to the organisation. Because we have lots of requests of people saying, oh, I want you to find a specific family that I can give to. As a church, we are not in a position to be able to make that decision. We're not in a position to know the situation of every person in town and to actually judge who's needier than another.
Well, Jude, you've really won the trust of so many people in your community through your extraordinary ministry since Christmas, and I want to pay tribute to you and Andy and thank you on behalf of the diocesan family, along with your colleagues in other parishes who've been on the front line of this emergency and have been serving so faithfully and generously and wisely in very difficult circumstances, and all our lay leaders as well have really rallied alongside their clergy, and it's been a wonderful response, and our prayers continue with you and your people.
Thank you.
And we're really, really grateful that you've been willing to just share some of your experience with us today.
That's right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming to visit. And that would be the other thing I would say about assistance. Come and visit us. Come in 6 months' time. Come in a year's time. Come when we're emotionally ready to have visitors, but come because we need tourists, and all of our parishes need tourists. Come and say hi to our congregations. Come worship with us.
Thanks, Jude.
Thanks,
Blessings.
Richard.